The difficult challenge of trying to do some summaries here of what we heard. I've been taking a few notes along the way. We talked about progress, and I think from my standpoint, following this for years, we heard about fusion centers, which in the early days, there was a lot of questions about them. Obviously, they're up and running. They're playing a major role right now in information sharing. The SAR reporting continues to move outside of the current sort of like a small scope of where it was, and is now being much more widespread. And the ISACs are maturing in terms of sharing information, making progress. We heard a lot about programs, A-Space, I-Space, project interoperability, which just by its very name sounds like a cool thing in terms of being able to move things to accomplish some of those stovepipe kind of issues. And I love that concept of the greatest hits, which I will use again and again and again. The greatest hits in information sharing use cases, and we need to publish them, get them out there, get those good stories out so that others learn from one another. And I think the IC collaborative environment we heard as a specific program that's making a real difference. Priorities going forward. Heard a lot around the world of management priorities, that there has to be management and leadership, and that they're very important because we need that in order to address the constraints we talked about. We talked about identity management being important. If we can continue to mature the world in identity management and solve those issues, it'll make a lot of these other things a lot easier to do. I heard a lot about statewide sharing being a priority. We need to continue to focus on that. Information has to go bi-directional, two different ways. We heard about a little bit of work on the insider threat, focusing some priorities on identifying that, as well as priorities to just keep the momentum, keep things moving, and don't get complacent. Constraints, the budget's always a constraint, so we keyed off with that. And then we had, I think we talked a lot about unaligned management practices and that trust and culture issue. And I think those are clearly key constraints. As I mentioned, it comes up show after show after show. People talk about we can do anything with the technology. We just need the people, processes, and the trust factors to work. And we need to trust one another that people are going to make good decisions and do right things. Maybe someone will make a mistake now and then, but that's okay if the mistake is trying to do something to move forward. And then we talked a little bit about interoperability with the private sector, and we talked about project interoperability again, and we talked about, I think Shemenda brought up some frameworks. If we can get frameworks in place that will allow the better collaboration and the ease of sharing will go a long way. As we look to the future, I think we talked about we need to address some of those culture and trust issues. They've got to be seen as ways to get where we need to go. And we're going to have massive amounts of data. So we're going to need analytical tools that can deal with massive amounts of data to be able to turn it into useful information that can allow for good decision making with oftentimes very little time to make those decisions. We talked about protecting the data and in assuring that there's focus on that protection side. It's one thing to have a lot of data, but needs to be protected. And we talked about continuing the momentum, open government, open ideas, and leveraging these frameworks that are there now so that they can for greater use. With that, I want to first turn and thank all our panelists for taking time from your busy schedules. I love doing these shows because you guys keep me smart. I'm just listening to all the great stories you tell.